we're going to see a lot of changes in this ecosystem very soon. Activity with words that we see and we hear, and in which dialect, from which human. The future will have so many different components like this. I think, let's say 5-7 years from now, we'll be shocked about all this data that we're not collecting or we're not doing something with it. It's just quote unquote being lost. I think thinking about what sound is and isn't. I love being surrounded by brilliant, hardworking people who are willing to challenge me and put the time in to make these things happen.
Welcome to the Sound and Marketing Podcast. Today's episode is the second half of my interview with Dr. Joan Bajorek of Women in Voice. We talked about where the voice industry is and isn't, and where we believe it's going. We talked about allyship and what that means and looks like in helping build up the voice community as a whole. Voice conferences, the good and the bad. Hardware and software companies beginning to both align with the importance of voice. The quality data in and out based on more appropriate models. Representation of different people and cultures, the interactivity of words, and the opportunity to be on the build side in this rapid change of human-computer interaction. I think that's a big part of it, is that we need to empower each other. Because, like I said, I worked in admin, and the last 3 executives I worked for, I believe 3, were all women. And they didn't play well with other women. So it was not a hostile environment, but it was definitely like, not that I was going to try and further myself in admin, but I definitely wasn't going to be able to, because they weren't going to let me. And I think that that's a huge disservice for everyone. Everyone needs to give everyone a chance. We need to work together. We're living this life. We're living in this world together. Let's live it together.
Yeah, no, I'm terribly sorry for that experience. It sounds deeply unpleasant.
It made me stronger. So it's all, and it made me upset enough to do something about it. I think that's basically what ended up happening, was that I saw this and I was like, this is not cool. And I'm going to move out of it.
Instigator for change, right? I mean, I think back to the moment that I literally launched Women in Voice, mission statement, Twitter handle, logo. But I was like, if I don't do it, will it not manifest? I was like, there's these women who don't believe in themselves. They are held back. Like, they're mentally restricted. I can't sit back. What am I doing if not, I felt extremely puny compared to these titans in our field that have been trailblazing since the 80s. But if structurally they're not supported or even recognized for their accomplishments, I don't know. I felt that's one of the first things I did when I launched Women in Voice, was ask for leadership support. I was like, I want to amplify that which already exists, but change some of the default norms.
So here's a question for the Women in Voice. Do you have any representatives of male or a minority, like Asian or Hispanic or any of that? How does it look for your leadership team for Women in Voice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, we are about to, it's not public yet, but I will be announcing my Chief Inclusion Officer. We currently are having so many different dialogues internally about the role of allies, because it's actually been phenomenal, the number of men banging down our door being like, I'm in, how can I help? Men, especially in Madrid and London, have been really stepping up to help with our events there. I don't know if you saw, but we were hosted the BBC with this huge spread, support monetarily and otherwise. And so trying to think about currently our leadership, my executive team, the ambassadors in every city, leadership in general, are all women or non-binary gender identifying, to my knowledge. We are currently having a dialogue about what the role of allyship is. It's something we're just discussing, and I can't say that I have an answer today, but I am just so thrilled. I guess Women in Voice is less than 2 years old. The number of emails I've gotten from men really kind of getting it. I think they're trying to figure out their role and what they can do, and we're trying to figure out similar things. So I hope to continue processing that and seeing where that goes.
That's exciting. And I, the other question that I asked, I don't think that there's an answer for anything right now. It's just that we're having a dialogue, that we're talking about it, and trying to find an answer to it.
Yeah.
And we may not ever come to it, but as long as we're trying to work out the problem and make inclusion a thing, make sure that everyone is included, I think that's kind of the name of the game, is just keep pushing to make it better and do better.
Well, and I also, absolutely pushing it, making it better, and listening. I mean, I make jokes every day about like localization is real, like that. What works in Seattle does not necessarily work for our chapter in Japan, doesn't necessarily work in Madrid or Mexico City. Like you mentioned about, I think, color representation. And like currently we don't track numbers of that specifically, but thinking about Asian representation and women of color representation in different respects. I mean, my leadership has pushed me about English and Spanish content. When we realized that there's a huge demographic of Spanish speakers we were not supporting in ways that we could. We're still so small and nascent, but I love them pushing me and saying, here's what we need to see. I'm willing to step up and put the work in so that our mentorship matching initiative can have a form fully supported in Spanish, right? I love being surrounded by brilliant, hardworking people who are willing to challenge me and put the time in to make these things happen.
I did want to get your general perspective on what voice looks like right now. And I didn't know, because I did read your Medium article. I was wondering, did you go to CES in January in Vegas?
Yes, I spoke twice at CES.
And what was your takeaway from that?
I mean, I wrote a Medium article about the three takeaways from being at CES. Google, as far as the voice field, Google had a huge presence at Voice at CES. Kind of, they're ready to make partnerships and friends.
It's definitely not surprising.
The thing is that Amazon has been so present and so willing to partner, and I think be more, let's try lots of things, let's throw projects at the wall and see what sticks. Whereas Google has been far more conservative and what people perceive as kind of slow moving. I see them as doing some deep strategy internationally. They support all these languages, and everyone tells me the user experience far surpasses Amazon products. It might be a more strategic rollout. Do you know what I mean? Like they're different strategies. CES is a very interesting conference, but maybe not my favorite conference of the year. I felt like there was a maybe 16-to-1 gender ratio. And I think maybe I'm just not a Las Vegas person. There's just like skyscrapers I have to take lifts between. But I felt that there are many different types of tech conferences, and maybe the tech conferences I see of the future, or the way I think about community, is antithetical to the way CES is set up. I don't know. It's big and intimidating and intense, even for those of us who are extremely confident and I think competent.
Well, that convention center is huge.
It is scary. My boss gave me ample heads up about that, but I think just my mental health recovering from that whole conference, it took quite a bit of a turnaround to get back. But I think CES, you get to see a lot of amazing projects happen around you and the different people who choose to attend. I think what's interesting is a lot of people, when I asked, are you going to CES? Are you going to CES? And they're like, oh, that's a hardware conference. Like, we're in software, which I thought was a very interesting piece of conversation, because Voice Summit, there are actually very few hardware companies that come. I think that seems slightly counterintuitive, or I definitely talked to different research tech teams that are like, we're building on an API. Why would we ever care about hardware? I think I think that will change in the future. I don't know if you saw Sonos recently acquired Snips.
Yes, I saw that.
Exactly. But I think some people are thinking these things through, but quality hardware significantly impacts user experience.
That's a good point. That's a definitely good point.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've seen studies about higher quality hardware almost eliminates gender bias in automatic speech recognition, but exacerbates socioeconomic status bias.
Wow.
I don't know if you've seen my Harvard Business Review article, but I'm deeply passionate about what the tech currently supports and why. Just related to basic AI and bias of who's in the room designing and developing and who's our end user can have pretty profound impacts if we can't understand you.
You'll have to send me that article and I'll link it in the show notes.
Oh, I'd be glad to. Yes, please.
Yeah.
It's called Speech Recognition Still Has Significant Race and Gender Bias, I think is the title of the article. I wanted to just be spicier, but thank you, Harvard Business Review. But it just basic stats of external research that's been done on the one specifically I look at is the Google API, and just the difference between a white male, white female, woman of color, and just big breakdowns in the quality of our accuracy, basically. And that's one of the best performing APIs in the world.
I wonder if they would ever design something, because I know that people that are hard of hearing or older people don't hear female voices as well as they hear male voices because the frequency is too high. And I wonder if there's a way to correct that in the tech. I don't even know how this works, but like to make it less inclusive. Bias. There you go. Yeah. To include or disinclude biases towards people hard of hearing or elderly.
I mean, I think thinking about who your end user is and how to support it best, how to support them best. Mostly the biggest problems, you're right, there are differences in frequencies, and literally the acoustic signal is different in different people, but the way we can design, I don't know if you've seen like Soapbox Labs, but like specifically designing ASR for children, for example. Or I talk to a lot of teams who are like, oh, we couldn't make things better. I don't know what you're talking about. And I say, well, my target demographic is, a 12-year-old bilingual girl. How will your system need to change to support her and only her? Right? And they go, oh, wait a minute. Okay, our backend needs to be totally reconfigured. The type of hardware might be different for the fidelity of the speech signal. Like there's all these different quote unquote changes that would need to happen to support other types of users. So honestly, quality data in and quality data out is what I'm currently deeply advocating for. What are we basing our models off of? I think is extremely important and very much underappreciated right now.
Yeah, and I think now is the time to do that sort of thing, to advocate for it, because there's no like hard set rules set in place. The ethics haven't been defined. This is so brand new that now is the time that people need to speak up and say, hey, this needs to be a factor every time, Right.
Well, and the thing is, it's so interesting. No one wants to go to my sessions on, bias. Right? Like if you go to a conference, like no one's interested in the bias conference session potentially, but they are very, very interested in the I will cut costs or your end user, like retention of users. My PhD advisor always told me the word bias, not sexy. The word money, very sexy. When I talk about cost, and Melinda Gates talks a lot about bias and how it affects purchasing power that women have. If it's not working for the person who has the purchasing power, I have a colleague in California who is originally from Spain, and he has certainly buying power to purchase, fancy voice IoT. But he's told me like, oh, I wouldn't even consider purchasing it because I know it doesn't work for me. He and his wife are looking at smart fridges. And I just think about the growth index in Florida and Texas and California and the type of users that I want to be buying my stuff. And thinking about just these different numbers end up being huge dollar signs. And so I think kind of flipping the narrative and being like, here's who I'm marketing to, here's who I'm thinking about, and is it going to be working for them? And if it's not, will I retain them as users? I think is a different way to play that game.
When I was at the Podcast Evolution conference a little bit ago, there was an app that was introduced that came across as like an interesting partnership between a podcasting network in South America somewhere and with a hardware company. So basically the podcast network, or the show, was called Radio Ambulante. I'm going to say that wrong. I'm sorry. Ambulante. That one, they basically would tell like narrative stories, real stories from any Spanish speaking person. So it was from all over the world. So it wasn't just Mexican. It was, Spanish. It was, wherever they speak Spanish, and it would be in that person's dialect, which was different to harder to ingest for certain people, just like, accents and everything in the US. Some are thicker and some are sweeter, and it's just a different sound. But it was very important for the person to tell the story in their own dialect. And what they found was there was 20% of their audience that they were not counting on. They were non-Spanish speaking. They were trying to learn Spanish. And so a lot of educators were using this podcast to introduce Spanish in different dialects to their students. And so what they were ending up doing was, because it was when people were listening to podcasts on websites or on desktops, and they would have about 3 different tabs up. They would have the tab up for the actual podcast that they were listening to, then another tab that would have like translation, and then another tab for like, tricky words that were like slang or something like that. Yeah. So they were flipping through all these tabs while they're watching or listening to this podcast. And so what the podcast found out was they're like, okay, well, we have this 20% that, want to explore it better, but they can't. So they partnered with this app called Lupa, and what Lupa does is it shows the dialogue or the transcription as you're listening to it. You can slow it down, speed it up. It'll highlight, like in green or something like that, words that are like what are they called? Vocabulary words, things that you should like look into more. They'll highlight things if it was just like somebody going like, that it wasn't actually part of the narrative. It was just a filler word. So it gave you this opportunity. And then I don't know, I kind of went on a tangent, but I think it was just like trying to speak to everyone. I think that was my point that I was going into.
Well, and I think the way, I really advocate for multimodal. And what I'm even hearing from you is that there's like, we hear these words, we see these words are tagged as something meaningful to us. Maybe they're even color blocked. Like I really see the world being like, ambient voice around us, but to like see it. Like, I don't know if you've seen with YouTube, where if it's in English, there's a Google API behind it that writes out captions. And you can literally click the words and it'll take you to the place in the video where that word was said. I think the way of this interactivity with words that we see and we hear, and in which dialect, from which human, the future will have so many different components like this. I think, let's say 5-7 years from now, we'll be shocked about all this data that we're not collecting or we're not doing something with it. It's just quote unquote being lost right now. Like, I don't know if you've seen the company Dreamr AI, but they're working on an API that's built into everything. Go to meeting, Zoom, and then it ambiently hears, and then it makes action items and like sends them to your email afterwards in many different contexts. So I think thinking about what sound is and isn't, especially from a sound engineer or podcaster perspective, we're going to see a lot of changes in this ecosystem very soon.
Yeah, I agree. And, with the inclusion of smart speakers or becoming more prevalent, I've spoken about this before. I got one because I was doing this podcast, and I was like, I should figure out what the frick this is, because I've never used these before. And so like my daughter, she's almost 5, she totally adopted it. It was easy for her. Yeah. And my son can't quite say Alexa, so he can't get her to do what he wants. So it's very frustrating. But I find it fascinating that items like that were developed and created that were not actually serving a need, in my opinion, but it became that. So it was like this like creature comfort thing that people wanted, and it was basically, and this is how I started using it, was just to listen to music or do a grocery list or whatever. But there's so much more to it, and people have not discovered it yet. And I agree with you. I think that the next 5 to 7 years is going to be fascinating, that we're going to have ways to learn about each other and communicate in just crazy new ways. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, I think about myself as like the wonkiest power user, like going into Google Docs and like testing out their API as they change the dictation tools. Like, why are we writing emails anymore? These type of things are that your kids are trying new things. Like I hear stories of kids walking up to screens and like Alexa, change the channel, like assuming these user expectations of what the tech should already be able to do.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, I try new things and people are like, oh, you would do that? You would try that out? Wait, that actually worked? And I talk about how could we complete, I have a new article coming out with Adobe about, if I were to ask something of your company, can I complete a transaction to purchase the thing, via voice and mobile, right? Like, are you prepared for this kind of revolution that I think you mentioned, you talked to Susan Westwater, but she certainly sees that world also, the voice of your brand, right? Marketing and those transactions, again, that end up being dollar signs.
Right. And that shouldn't be our motivation, but it is.
Well, you do have to pay the bills at the end of the day. No, I'm not all in it for the money. I feel like someone asked me that recently. They're like, oh, you're in voice tech. You must be really excited to become really famous and really rich. And I was like, that is literally, utterly, I am so much more like the human computer interaction is radically changing. And I get to potentially be on the build side and pushing our world forward in that respect. Like,
and that's exciting. That's really cool.
Isn't that fantastic? It's so cool. I'm very excited. It's just so nascent, there's these big bubbles. You mentioned thinking about what outliers the book means or doesn't mean. And I think we're on these forefronts. There's like tsunamis coming towards us of user behavior and, people questioning what's going to happen, clunky apps, and then a flood of adoption that we saw with mobile that's happening with voice.
And that's with anything, with any new product. It's going to be clumsy at the beginning because we're figuring it out.
Oh,
so,
yeah. The first iPods, right?
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Oh, my gracious. And now everyone, ubiquitous smartphones.
And the iPod is gone.
my dad still has one, but yes.
I still have my little iPod Shuffle. I love it for running because it's so light and he just clips on. They don't make them anymore, I don't think, but I really like that.
You go to eBay for those.
Oh, yeah, of course. What would you say is your favorite voice conference or convention or something of the year? Like, what do you look forward to? What's a good place for people to like really see what's coming?
I think if you're from the big business, anyone who's anyone should be at Voice Summit as far as I'm concerned. You're welcome, Pete Erickson. But Women in Voice is having a conference July 8th and 9th this year. It's not public yet, but we will be having a small conference here in Seattle in July. So at least keep it on your radar. I think it's really location specific and depending on your vertical. There's so many things that are specific to, specific to healthcare, specific to education, that are phenomenal networking.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's kind of all encompassing. So yeah,
it can be really intense and overwhelming, and then and sometimes you don't meet the person you actually wanted to meet.
Right. So. But maybe you meet somebody better. You never know.
I think just being open to finding partners and allies in so many different places.
And then to close it out, what would you say to a woman that is starting to get fascinated in the world of voice, whatever that may look like? That may be the tech side, that may be voice actor, that may be anything. What would you say to someone who hasn't quite figured out where they fit in yet?
You do fit. Come join Women in Voice. And really sky's the limit. You don't have to just be a designer or a dev or a marketer or researcher, whatever the case may be. I think there's so many roles and skill sets that go across things and that are amorphous. Like, we are currently building what the future of these teams will look like. So definitely a skill set that goes across things is wildly helpful.
And how would one get a hold of you if they wanted to?
My email is joanpba@gmail.com. Women in Voice, you can also ping on our Twitter or LinkedIn. Make sure to say exactly why you're contacting and action items.
Very important.
I'm a very busy person. I have to filter, unfortunately.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you're busy.
Yes. Not a problem.
Well, thank you so much, Joan, for joining me today.
Absolutely.
This has been wonderful, and I could talk to you for a really long time, but I know you're a busy person. So
Well, thank you for having me. It's been lovely.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Sound and Marketing Podcast. Stay tuned next week when I interview Pete Erickson of Modev and Voice Summit. We'll talk about the sound landscape as he sees it from his unique perspective. A great talk and some great events put on by him and his companies, including the Inside Voice podcast. If you haven't heard any of their episodes yet, go now. It's great. I'll link them in my show notes. For more of the Sound and Marketing Podcast, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and share. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, iHeart Radio, Pandora, and Stitcher. Reviews and ratings are always appreciated. To get in touch with Joan, you can email her at joanpba@gmail.com, or you can find her as well as all the wonderful Women in Voice information at womeninvoice.wordpress.com. I hope you're enjoying the Sound and Marketing Podcast. Don't forget to follow and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and Stitcher. Reviews, ratings, and shares are all most definitely appreciated. For inquiries on producing and developing your own podcast, or for inquiries on sonic branding and sonic branding consultation availabilities, you can find me at Dreamr Productions. That's DREAMR Productions.com, LinkedIn, and Facebook. You can also email me at Jeanna, JEANNA, @dreamrproductions.com. All links will be provided in the show notes. This episode was produced by Dreamr Productions and hosted, written, and edited by me, Jeanna Isham. We all make sounds. Let's make them on purpose. Let's make this world of sound more intriguing, more unique, and more on brand.